thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. In general, again, I apologize for a little bit the joining, interrupting and late. I am Isabel Ladrón Arroyo, and I work at the European Commission in DG Employment. And I'm the policy officer who covers micro-credentials. So the file on micro-credentials, just to tell with you, is covered both by EAC, that is education, but also by DG Employment, which shows like the relevance of like how micro-credentials are fundamental for labor markets. And I'm actually part of the vocational education and training unit that is also part of DG Employment. So in this presentation, together with my colleague Kia, we will have like an overview of the policy framework on both micro-credentials and digital credentials. I will cover the part of micro-credentials, and then I will give the floor to Kia to talk about digital credentials. And maybe just as a very introductory remark, the whole point with that is that while micro-credentials is a bit a concept that I will try to explain, digital credentials is like the format under which you may issue micro-credentials, right? So just to have like this, to bear this difference in mind, but like happy to elaborate afterwards. So please, next slide. Like before going in a little bit more in depth with micro-credentials, I would like to put them within the overall framework of a skills development policy in the EU. So basically, there is like an aim at the EU that has to do with mainstreaming lifelong learning among adult population. So somehow upskilling and reskilling should be the norm in a very fast-changing world and labor market where skills needs change at a pace that sometimes a traditional or a formal education and training institutions has difficulty to keep up. So there is where like micro-credentials can step in as a tool, but not only. Like in general, there are so many actions and so many tools that the EU is trying to put forward to boost lifelong learning. And this is like somehow encompassed, or that's part of like the European Skills Agenda, that is the framework for skills development until 2025. And also in this slide, I used to have like the logo of the European Year of Skills that I guess you are well aware. Now it has came to an end, but we've been like for a year promoting a lot like this idea of skills development. And the whole thing, like these three parts that the slide has, is that this skills development is fundamental for sustainable competitiveness, so that the market has the skills that it needs, but also for social fairness, so that nobody's left behind in this rapid development of the needs in the labor market, and also for having a society that is really resilient to shocks, like for example it was the pandemic some years ago, and all of a sudden we all needed a minimum of basic digital skills. So very much linked to this idea. The next slide, please. The EU has set some targets by 2030 that has to do with the skills development. So we aim at having 60% of adult population engaging in training every year. That's a lot. This is the idea of like mainstreaming, right? Lifelong learning. Like it's not only like young people when they're a student and they are learning new stuff, but like everybody. And then regarding digital skills, there is a target linked to basic digital skills. That is this idea of like at least 80% of Europeans should have digital skills. In labor market, 90% of jobs will require or are requiring these digital skills, but that's also fundamental for social inclusion. Like when you think about it, like if you need like to use a banking system, like access to public services and all this is going online, when you do not have these digital skills, there is a risk of being left behind, of being socially excluded. And then the third target is describing absolute numbers, so it's not a percentage of the population, but we talk about 20 million ICT specialists, and is linked to advanced digital skills, and has to do with this idea of being competitive, right? Of like having a labor market, like a labor force that is rightly skilled for the market needs. Like just to give you an idea, we are around like now half of this target now, and we aim at having double the ICT specialists within Europe to attract these people or to educate these people by 2030. Also keeping in mind this idea of gender convergence. Like in this sector, there is a lot of good quality jobs, and it would be a pity that that's not like we cannot tackle on the full potential of our population because it's like completely male-dominated sector. So that's the overall policy framework for skills development, and more concretely on micro-credentials. Please, the next slide. So as we said, they can be a very useful tool for the labor market and for this need of upskilling and reskilling because of their nature. Like micro-credentials are targeted. That means They offer relevant learning, like they go to the point of what the market or what society needs at a certain point, at a certain moment. They are by definition small in volume, short in duration, and also by definition flexible. So they can fit the way in which people live, learn, and work, and that's fundamental. Like we will see it later, but micro-credentials should be fundamentally learner-centered. And I think that here there is like a huge potential for training providers, education and training providers, to adapt education and to make it more inclusive by leveraging on this nature of micro-credentials being by definition more flexible than what maybe formal education and training systems are. So next slide, please. The thing is that, okay, during the pandemic, micro-credentials exponentially grow on their own. It's not that like the European Union or like public policies were there to shape how they did, right? Like they grown, pushed somehow, or like driven by a labor market need. But in this context in which they grow organically and driven by a need, and they are flexible and they are agile and they adapt, which is completely positive, like we observed that there were the challenge of like, okay, how do we understand that? How everybody can understand micro-credentials in the same way and compare them, and how does relate to traditional qualifications. So to face these challenges is where the European Union stepped in with a council recommendation. That means that the member states agree to come together and on certain minimum standards and commit themselves to implement at the member state level, because in the end, the competence on education and training is still at a member state level, and the Commission and the European Union can only support. So that's how a council recommendation took place, was adopted in June 2022 under the title European Approach to Micro-Credentials for Lifelong Learning and Employability. So next slide, please. And the rationale behind, as I was hinted a little bit before, is to promote the quality of micro-credentials, the trust of them, and the uptake, with the overall goal of making them more comparable and understandable. So another way to say it in maybe simpler words is like, okay, let's try to put some order. Let's try it without killing the beauty of micro-credentials. That is that they are spontaneous, they are agile, they are flexible, they are adaptable, they respond to labor market needs. So without killing this point of the flexibility of micro-credentials, let's try to adopt a European approach, to put some order there with a common understanding of what micro-credentials are, to be able to make them more comparable and understandable by all relevant stakeholders. So this is the rationale behind the council recommendation. And please, the next slide. That's how it looks like. So you are very much invited. I'm sure like after the project you've done like you are aware of it, but like just to show you. And the next slide, please. This is the content, like in a very overview way of the council recommendation. So it includes 3 building blocks. And like something that is already very useful is that it includes a common definition of what micro-credentials are, includes what are the standard elements that should describe a micro-credential, and what are the principles for the design and the issuance of micro-credentials. That is to say, what should be taken into consideration when designing and issuing a micro-credential. That's what has to do with the building blocks, and then I will briefly elaborate a little bit on each of these points. And then the key areas of actions is like the creation, please like the slide before yet, thanks a lot, is the creation of ecosystems, like the way to deliver on the potential of micro-credentials, or at least to identify what is the potential of micro-credentials and how the European Commission can support them. And maybe something that is quite interesting regarding the focus is that the scope of the Council recommendation covers what has to do with education, training, and skills policies, but also with active labor market policies. So in that sense is where I stress in the beginning that it's important to consider that this is treated not only from the education department of the Commission, the Directorate General of Education, Culture and Sports and so, but also from the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. That is where I do work. So please, the next slide. Just to have a quick overview of the common definition of micro-credentials. When are we talking about micro-credentials? When we are describing the record of a learning outcome. So it's not about the notional workload, it's not about attending in a small course, it is about having certified, having assessed and certified and recognized what is that I get out of this small training course. So that's why we mentioned record of learning outcomes of a small volume of learning. This is not further specified, and here like there is some discussion, right? Like if we are in the university context or in a higher education context, we can talk about ECTS and so on and so forth, but not in every context that can happen, because a micro-credential can also be issued by a trade union, by employer, by a public employment service, and all kind of stakeholders that are not necessarily into this formal setting. Then like this learning outcome should be assessed. Like the micro-credential needs to be owned by the learner, so that then the learner is free to move around, right, with this micro-credential. That's why it should be shared and portable, and to demonstrate this skill somewhere else where it should be recognized. They can stand alone or be combined, and they should be underpinned by quality assurance. So that's regarding the definition. The next slide, please. Has to do with which are the standard elements to describe a micro-credential. And here, like just to make it super easy to understand, like I put here the compulsory, so to speak, standard elements. That is that, okay, when issuing a micro-credential, you should put the date of issuing. You should describe what the learning outcomes were. You should put the title of the micro-credential. You should put what was the notional workload needed to achieve the outcomes, right? And then of course, where possible, use ECTS. If you don't have this system, use something else, but please describe the notional workload. This is a bit the idea, right? That we can have micro-credentials that can to some extent speak to each other, you know, that we will have the same standard elements describing all micro-credentials issued by any kind of training provider, that this is where the scope is super broad and where challenges can come up. So then the third building block, please. The next slide has to do with the principles for designing and issuing micro-credentials. So quality, transparency, relevance. I won't go by each of them because now we don't have much time, but I will insist on what has to do with this learner-centered, right? I think that we really should keep in mind like the flexibility that micro-credentials can potentially be used for social inclusion, considering all kind of learners that maybe are not so well adapted to formal education in the way that we normally do it, but that here we find an element of flexibility that we can leverage on. So then please, the next slide. I want to include here further research done on micro-credentials by CEDEFOP, that is the EU agency for research on vocational education and training, mapping micro-credentials specifically for labor market. Then ETF, that is another EU agency that covers training, is like European Training Foundation, but rather it works with third countries other than member states, that has issued a guide to design, issue, and recognize micro-credentials that can be very useful at an operational level, because somehow it elaborates on this third building block that I presented, that is the principles for issuing and designing micro-credentials. And finally, we have worked together with the OECD on an implementation project where more focus on higher education, so maybe that's interesting for you as well, and maybe you are already well aware, where 4 case studies has been done on Slovenia, Spain, Finland, and Slovak Republic. So that's it on that side. You will have access to the slides in case you are interested. And finally, just to show you a little bit what is that the European Commission is doing at the moment on micro-credentials, we are working on collecting feedback from the member states on their state of implementation of the Council recommendation that I've presented before on a European approach to micro-credentials. And we are doing it making sure that we cover the full scope of the Council recommendation. That is to say, higher education, but also vocational education and training, and also all that has to do with labor market systems, with these active labor market policies. There is currently open an Erasmus Plus policy experimentation call until today. So deadline is now, maybe a little bit late to promote it here in this context, but maybe you were already aware. And finally, we regularly organize peer learning activities with member state authorities so that member states can learn from each other on how is that they are implementing and bringing forward micro-credential systems, or how is that they are implementing the Council recommendation. The latest one, we had it like a week ago and was very successful. We had Croatia as a host country displaying how they had included micro-credentials in their adult education law. And that's all on my side. I will give the floor now to my colleague Kia, who will tell us more about like the policy framework, this time for digital credentials, that beyond the concept is like this very specific way in which one can issue a credential, including a micro-credential. So thank you very much for your attention. And please, Kia, if you want to give the presentation.
Certainly. Thank you very much for the introduction, Isabel. And indeed, I will be talking a little bit more about digital credentials, specifically European digital credentials. So what do we talk about when we are talking about digital credentials? In its essence, it's just a digital presentation of any traditional learning credential that is directly issued in a digital format into a learner's wallet. So this can be your a micro credential, but it can also be any other type of credential. The idea really here is that it's in a digitally native format rather than, for instance, a scan of your paper credential. So it is a way of issuing micro credentials or any other type of credential. And when it comes to the context within which European digital credentials have evolved, it is very much the same as to micro-credentials. It has a lot of the same aims, but it also covers the need to adapt to a digitalizing world. We're doing everything online nowadays. It only makes sense that our credentials also evolve with this, and that they are in a format that is digitally native, that it is not only the paper version that is always the one that you're presenting somewhere, but that you have a digital version that ideally would have the same value as your paper one. And if we're moving to something digital, we also need to make sure that there is security and trust within this framework. And here, European digital credentials have provided a framework on ensuring that security and trust, making sure that these credentials are tamper evident, meaning that you can see whether there's been any changes in the credential, that you can trust the origin of these credentials, that they, you know where they come from, that they were fighting fraud to the best of the abilities. And then on top of this, helping recognition, whether it is by ensuring that there's as much data as possible in these credentials and making sure that the EQF levels are referenced in the credential, the number of ECTS are referenced, but also by using a single data model, which is called the European Learning Model, on providing information when it comes to learning, making these credentials comparable to each other, knowing that there's always the same set of information presented in the same way within each of these credentials. This also helps showcase the knowledge on skills of a recipient of a credential, because we have this certain framework of showing this information. And the digital format also allows to include a lot more information into a credential than you would in a paper format. You can actually describe the learning outcomes directly in the credential without having a document of 20 pages, let's say. It's all there in a easily navigable way. And finally, there's also the ownership of the data and having the citizen in control of their own information, meaning that they receive a credential, they choose who they share it with for what period of time. They really remain in control of their own information. And with this said, a digital credential is made out of two layers. So we have what we call the content itself, which would be the learning outcomes, the skills, the description of the activities. So really what we understand as the content of a credential itself. Then you have the envelope, which is what provides the security and trust to a credential. So that's what covers the area of identity, authentication, and secure delivery policies. So I will skip a little bit of these slides. You'll be able to read the definitions more in detail because we're running out of time a little bit. But from the content side, this means that you can create different types of credentials, whether it is an actual qualification and a micro-credential, whether it is just showing an activity and for instance, in the case of a certificate of participation, whether it is showing only the assessments in the case of a transcript of records, or an entitlement, so a right to enroll in somewhere else. By being based on the European learning model, which covers basically all possible use cases for a record or a document stating something that a person has achieved in their learning, you can really choose what type of information you want to showcase and how you want to create your credential and at what level, whether it is a micro-credential, whether it is a certificate of participation, whether it is a full-on diploma. You can really use the same basis to create all these different types of credentials. And in its essence, when it comes to micro-credentials specifically, the council, the standard elements that Isabella already presented are included within the European learning model, meaning that you can easily create a micro-credentials as a European digital credential and including all of these different elements. There's a direct mapping of the Annex 1 to the European learning model available that we can also share with you. So you can see how exactly this would work, which fields you would need to fill in to make sure that you're compliant with this. And just as a quick example of how it would look like, so a European digital credential is a dynamic form. It's not just a paper, so you will be able to navigate it by clicking through the different parts of it. So you see that there's here a specific tab open. You can see that, for instance, the type of assessment is visible here, and the same would then apply to each of the elements of a recommendation. And having in mind that this is what the content would look like, there we talked briefly about ensuring the security and trust in the credentials. This is provided by what is called an ESL or an electronic seal. This is an EIDAS compliant electronic signature of a kind that is provided for institutions. That is essentially the digital equivalent of a organization's rubber stamp. And this is used to sign the credential. You will see here that you have an awarding body, and it is signed by, in this case, our little test seal, but you will always be able to see the origin of a credential. This always comes from the seal, meaning that you cannot state another organization as the issuing body than it actually is. And how you can know that this would have been changed would be by what we call tamper evidence. So when you're viewing a credential, it will look like this generally, and you will see that there's a series of authentication and verification checks on the right side. This is making sure that the format of a credential is valid, that everything is in line, and if there would be any accreditation linked to it, which is also something that you could refer to if your institution is accredited, it would also appear as a check here, and you will see that everything is fine. The moment somebody changes anything in the credential, whether it is a single character, whether they try to change their grade, their name, whatever it might be, this is what it will look like. The seal will have been broken on the credential. And the verification of it will be failed. So whoever is then viewing this credential will be automatically aware that something may have happened and can contact the person in question to see whether this might have been intentional or not, and further investigate whether they should be able to trust this credential or not. I've talked a lot about now about what we actually mean by European digital credentials and digital credentials in general. So what does the European Commission offer in this sense? Basically a full infrastructure to actually build, issue, store, share, and verify a digital credential yourself. By building, we provide an online credential builder that is essentially filling into a template so that you can choose how to create and your own credentials. You can then directly issue them using this same platform. The only thing you would need is the e-seal. Otherwise, the whole point of it is a little bit moot. Then from the side of the actual learner, they'll be able to store these credentials securely in one wallet. We make one wallet available to any person who has a Europass account. I will not go into the details of Europass, but you might have heard of it already, at least when in the context of Europass CVs. Within your Europass account, you also have a wallet. So there's already more than 7 million wallets available to citizens. And from there, they can then choose to share it onwards in the similar view that I just showed with the authentication and verification checks, just with one click onwards to prospective employers or anyone else, and who will then be able to verify this easily. We offer this both as a series of web tools that anyone can start using as of right now, if you would like. And there's also an open source version of it that you can install within your own IT infrastructure, meaning that you can fully actually automate this flow to build and create your own digital credentials. Apologies for going a little bit quickly. I hope it is still relatively clear, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I see that there are some questions in the chat. Joao, if you agree, I would be happy to have the colleagues answer them now, unless you prefer to have them at the very end. So I see that there's, well, actually 2 of the questions are from Joao and one from Sophie. Joao, if you are okay with it, I would start from Sophie Griveau if she wants to speak up. Otherwise, I will read the question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the very clear presentation. And maybe I add one of my answers during the second presentation from Kia. Yes, it was about the assessment. Should it be clearly described under the micro-credential, I would say, template for the future student? And yes, what is the degree of I would say, precision that is required for assessment?
Should I take it, Kia? Like, I guess, Sophie, that you rather address it to me, right? When it comes to micro-credential, but please, Kia, like, feel free to also complement or so. Yes, so actually, like, thanks a lot for the question. It was very well formulated. I guess that at the European level, we cannot go so much in the operational detail of what's the degree of description of the assessment. But what we do in this common European approach as a standard element that the type of assessment is like, please describe it. Where possible, using all that already exists, right? So in that sense, I think that in the higher education world, there is a lot. I'm not an expert, you are there, right? But there is a lot done on quality assurance mechanisms, type of assessments, governance on education, right? Like there is a lot of formalities done upon which one should leverage, right? So when introducing micro-credentials, why not to use the same standards, right? Like to describe the type of assessment, to describe the notional workload. That's a little bit the idea. I guess in that sense, you have a lot of done, right? Like in the labor market, a trade union, believe me, do not have this, right? Then the university has. The good thing about like when micro-credentials come from the labor market or from VET is that they are very close to the labor market needs. They know how to relate to industry, that maybe that's a challenge that the universities has, right? And then it's where universities need to maybe like have a challenge ahead. But when it comes to the very issuing of a title, I want to believe that you know how to do this, right? So
yes,
if you have a way in which you describe the type of assessment, use it, be consistent, like the more we can compare, the better. And comparability is one thing. When we cannot do that, because we are talking about such a broad world, and I insist it should stay flexible and so, but then let's try to be as transparent as possible, right? How can I be transparent with what I did? How can I build trust on that so that someone else can recognize that, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that this is the answer. I cannot be more concrete.
Yes,
but
thank
I
you very much. It's very clear. Thank you very much.
That they have to collaborate on what you know how to do. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And Joao, do you want to proceed with your two questions?
Yeah, I'll try to be synthetic. So the first question is to Isabel Arroyo. You mentioned in slide 1 about recognition, and from my perspective, recognition is more not from the not, let's say, an obligation or a task of the issuer of a credential, but much more on those who will, let's say, use that credential, for example, to in a mobility state process or something like that, and because as you pose it, it looks like it's an obligation of the issuer, but I'm not sure about that. I'd like to hear your ideas on that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. That's actually one of like our main pain points, right? That we keep discussing in these peer learning activities. How do we build trust? How do we boost recognition? And you said, right, like recognition is something that happened later. But if you ask me like my view or my experience on that, or what I heard about in all these policy discussions, is that something that the issuer can do from recognition is to engage from the beginning in the design of the micro-credential, in the conceptualization of it, and so like those stakeholders that then need to recognize it, right? And then there is where maybe there is some margin. Where I work normally, that is for VET and for the labor market, is that, like, just to show you an example, very concrete, very far away maybe from your reality, but that can be as an example, right? An Erasmus Plus project that works for skills for the long-term unemployed. So working with a very vulnerable group, what they've done is like not waiting for a very big system of micro-credentials to arrive, but to sit down together in a table, an employer that has labor shortages, an NGO that works with very vulnerable groups like long-term unemployed, people living on the streets, whatsoever, right? And the training provider, and co-design together a micro-credential that the three parts agreed upon somehow, and that the employer then will recognize. So their way to guarantee recognition is that they are engaged since the beginning in the design, right? And then this employer will recognize it. Super small example, very far away from your reality, but just to tell you like the different ways in which this recognition is also being built by the issuer by engaging who needs to be recognized afterwards, right? Like how do we create ownership and stuff like this?
Okay. The other question, if I may, Federica, thank you for your answer first, is to Kia, and it's related with slide 10 of Isabel, where she mentions a type of quality assessment and of quality assurance. And I'm just curious to understand in the European Digital Credentials, which part is this information inserted? Is it in the accreditation system or is it somewhere else?
Indeed, it would be via accreditation system. So there's two ways of doing this within European Digital Credentials. You can use our linked accreditation system, which currently makes use of the DECAR database that you might be familiar with. So if you already have an accreditation report published within DECAR, you can directly reference it and have this done automatically. There's also the possibility to actually add this manually, whether if you would not have this published, and you can choose to
Okay, thank you.
Populate this manually.
Thanks a lot. And I think we have time for a very last question before we move on. And I think it's Nikos from the University of Thessaloniki. Hello.
Hi. Hello, good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I couldn't join you from the beginning, so probably my question might be a little bit silly, but still I want to ask it. So you mentioned about micro-credentials and the digital credentials. So we are talking about standards, about a framework that we should use when issuing this kind of credentials, and there is also a ready-made tool to use organizations that, for example, I suppose there should be some kind of a software to issue these kind of credentials. So is it something that the Commission provides? Thank you very much.
Thanks
maybe
a lot
I can, or you go.
Go ahead, Kia. Yeah.
I can maybe go for the infrastructure side. Indeed, there's a ready-made tool, so the European Digital Credentials for learning infrastructure, but you can use to issue micro-credentials or any other type of credentials for free, readily available to anyone.
Yeah, and actually this specific tool based on the policy framework for micro-credentials. That is this council recommendation that indeed what it does is like try to establish some minimum standards to have a common European approach to micro-credentials. Actually, that's the name of the council recommendation, right? So indeed, it's both. It's the framework that then you can use and adapt, and at every member state is like implementing it and like putting it on national legislation that where they have competencies for doing so that the EU doesn't have, only can issue a council recommendation. But on top of that, we've developed this tool specifically that you can directly use and is consistent with this, of course, council recommendation.
Thanks a lot. And we probably will hear more about how this was used in the Doctoral for You presentation, because this is what we have been using to issue the digital credentials. But now I would proceed with the next presentation, if you all agree. And the next presentation will be delivered by the colleagues from the University of Limerick, Dr. Sarah Brady and Helen Brown. So if you want, you can already share your presentation and start it whenever you want. Sarah cannot hear you. Okay.
So just bear with me. Are you seeing presentation?
Yes, not
yes,
in
not in slide.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So lovely to meet you all. I'm delighted to be here presenting to you on our example from the University of Limerick of how we've been using micro-credentials. I want to share with you the journey that we've been on with this. But first, I suppose, the first thing I wanted to share with you is not just our perspectives, but perspectives from industry, because we think this is an extremely important part. So I want to share a short video with you and be interested to see what you think of it afterwards. So again, I just want to be sure that you can hear sound. So, are you hearing sound? Okay, just one sec. This is where I need Zoom colleagues to give me a hand here. where would I find the sound?
So it's probably next to your microphone icon on the bottom left. I think options to share the audio from videos should be there.
So not microphones here.
So you have microphone and speaker, so you should be able to check the settings there. But if not, I can also try to troubleshoot while you deliver the rest of the presentation.
Okay, no, it's not. I'm not going to find it there. Sorry, we're Microsoft.
Aha, okay. Are you sharing the screen?
I'm sharing the screen, yeah. So if I here.
I don't know. So if you share the screen and you have an option next to share screen, do you have more as an option if you click on the arrow next to share screen?
Sorry, guys.
I don't think we have.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. This is all I have.
No, I'm sorry.
I can hear slightly, Sarah. Whether
Okay.
it's because you've shared whether we're sharing. No, it's not. It's not. It's not loud enough.
Not loud enough. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know where I'm after going now. And just end show. Okay. Okay. We may that's a wee bit disappointing now. Because I suppose what I wanted to illustrate to you is the value that industry are seeing for micro-credentials. I think Isabella, you were mentioning there about that kind of recognition and seeing the value of micro-credentials, and that's one of the key aspects I suppose we want to highlight when you know, in any of the micro-credentials that we deliver. Maybe we'll share it in another sense, but basically I'll just speak over just for a moment. I suppose we're delighted to be able to work with people such as Timmy in this example, and what he does say is, just moving on, is that really at the moment what the challenge is for people in industry is not that technology is changing. We're all aware that the world of work is changing very rapidly. It's not that the technology is the difficult part, but it's the pace and change and velocity of how this technology is changing, and that the need for upskilling and reskilling is really vital. And that micro-credentials allow for that fast, intensive education to match that change that they're happening and that they're seeing in industry, and that people really do have to embrace it in order to survive in this career-orientated world, in career-orientated companies. And that the more that industry, we as an industry, do with universities, the more benefit it will be to our various different team members. And that really they recognize that talented people want to extend their talent. And that's really that's what we're hearing from industry. And we're seeing that they're saying that micro-credentials are one way of enabling that talent development. And I think that's one thing that at the University of Limerick we highly value and recognise. And we've built up this relationship with a lot of our industry partners in the region. And I suppose I wanted to I'll hand over to my colleague Helen, who will speak to you a little bit about the University of Limerick in more depth, and just, I suppose, give you a sense of how we've been using education for that kind of sense of regional development. So Helen, I'll hand to you. Is that okay?
Great. Great, thank you, Sarah. I work with Sarah. My name is Helen Brown, and I work with Sarah in professional education within the Graduate and Professional Studies division. My role is to engage with industry and individuals who want to upskill or reskill, either to return to education or to progress their career. For those of you who aren't au fait with the University of Limerick, we're based in the Midwest on nearly 400 acres of beautiful land. And I know I'm a little bit biased, but I do think it's probably one of the most beautiful campuses in Europe. We've over 18,000 students from over 80 countries, of which 3,000 students are part-time, with a majority of those being professional. I'll just see, can I move on, Sarah, there? Sarah, you might move on for me there if you can. Yes, I don't seem to be able to move. So within GPS, we design and develop new innovative pathways for professional students. And the Micro-Credentials project is a real example of really how innovative we can be with education. We work with companies to promote educational opportunities for their workforce, for those wishing to return, or those who want to, as I said already, upskill or reskill within their own role. Micro-credentials are really becoming very attractive to companies, especially to engage reluctant learners. We have a very high employment rate here in Ireland, so it's very hard to engage professional students to go back into education to do a big maybe degree or master's. So the microcreds are a really nice way of, getting students back to test the water, to dip their toe into the water and get back onto a program. So we also manage the student journey of thousands of domestic students and international applications per year. And this is really made, we work very closely with our academic colleagues to do this. Next slide there, please, Sarah, if you don't mind. So we access national, international and government funding pots on behalf of professional and postgraduate learners. External funding pots is a competitive process that supports in the main teaching resources, learning technologies, and the design and delivery of new programs. Here's just an example of some of the funding initiatives that we've been very successful in and that has allowed us to access funding for reskilling and upskilling. We've a long new slide there, please, Sarah, if you don't mind. So our work, we've a long established reputation of working with industry. We engage business on the design and delivery of a lot of our programs. We work with companies on staff upskilling and reskilling, and we engage with industry to provide graduate employment pathways for our graduates. So that we were the first ever university in Ireland to develop a co-op program, and this is where students go out on a work placement while they're in their undergraduate during their undergraduate studies. We're also the first university in Ireland to have executive apprenticeships. Now, these are apprenticeships while you are working to upskill while you're in employment, and we're the first in the world to have a level 10 doctoral apprenticeship, and the first graduate, we have our first graduate this summer. Another one of the major funding mechanisms that we access for professional learners would be Springboard. You're probably all aware of that. We have a strong Springboard history at Joao, doubling our intake in the last 5 years. These are subsidised courses at certificate, degree and master's level, and they focus on where we have skills deficits in the region and in the country as a whole. We normally take in 200 to 300 students annually. During COVID, I suppose there was a huge push on upskilling to get businesses back on their feet. So we accessed funding through the July stimulus initiative to get students back into into work, or to reskill while they are at work. And we were successful in getting 850 enrollments onto micro-credential programs. We were also very lucky this year. We were able to access another funding pot from the Government of Ireland, the HEA, the Irish University Association, and the Human Capital Initiative. We were able to access 1.69 million to offer over 100 micro-credential programs to adult learners, and these will take place over this autumn and next spring. Could you move on the slide there, sir? Okay, so the good and the bad news is we'll all have to upskill in the next 2 years. We really 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025, and now the majority of employees will require you to gain a skill while you are working with them. Now, key areas we will need to focus will be one in technology. So as digital transformation continues across industries, we will have to become more proficient in ICT, and skills that are kind of highly sought at the moment for us from industry would be cybersecurity, data analytics, cloud computing, and AI. These are in huge demand at the moment within our area. Sustainability, with the global push on sustainability, skills related to renewables, environmental conservation and green technologies are gaining huge momentum. But also not to forget the softer skills. As we get more automated, we're going to have to rely on our own soft skills, as in being able to think critically, solve complex problems. Creativity is always one that is uniquely human, so we won't be able to pass that. Well, we shouldn't be able to pass that over to AI. And also emotional intelligence skills are really becoming very important from a leadership point of view, and dealing with that whole digital transformation, being able to guide your staff through that kind of unnerving and worrisome time. And the last is lifelong learning with new technologies, with new areas of work. We're going to have to be able to continually learn and to adapt. It's not just in technical skills, but also to learn new careers, and to be able to pivot your career as it's needed. It's always critical that you're able to move from one particular role to another, especially when industry is moving at such a high pace. So that's me, Sarah, if you want to go back to the history.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Helen, and thanks a million for that kind of oversight. So Helen, as you said, is business development officer or manager with the professional education team. And look, she's always on the road, and she's always the one that's out there talking to people, to employers, to employees, understanding what their needs are, both from an employer's point of view, but also the personal, the individual themselves. So really has such an insight into what industry are looking for. And I'm really happy that, you know, I'm delighted to be able to work with her on that on the team, as the professional education team at UL. And what we feel is that we bring all these kind of various different elements together. My role is the MicroCreds project lead for the University of Limerick, which is a specific purpose project looking at mainstreaming the provision of micro-credentials at 7 of the universities across Ireland, UL being University of Limerick being one of them. But I suppose I want to show here basically the history and the context of delivering micro-credentials at UL. It's not something that is radically new for us at UL, because we've always been involved in that conversation with industry. We've always had listening to what their needs are, and they have told us that they want shorter forms of accredited learning. So back in 2016, we started to deliver what's called University Certificates of Study. So again, accredited forms of modular learning. And we've used that basis and expertise to, we've brought those strengths into the MicroCreds project we started in 2020. And you'll see that as the project has taken hold, we've introduced a number of governance structures in the University of Limerick, establishing our advisory group, having that cross-campus conversation and consultation in order to mainstream micro-credentials. Again, bringing that awareness not only to the early adopters, but right across the campus of the value of micro-credentials. And as Helen mentioned, in 2021, we received funding to enable a big intake of learners onto our micro-credentials. And I suppose that speaks to another kind of big part of our work, that we would be lobbying with government agencies in order to get funding to support learners to come onto our courses, also looking for funding to develop micro-credentials. So it's a kind of a two-string approach, because without resources and without support like that, it can be very challenging to bring micro-credentials to the market. Then in 2020, again, we start seeing the more kind of formal adoption of the definition. And to the position now that we're in at 23-24, we've got over 100 micro-credentials on offer, and they're available through the MicroCreds portal. But I suppose maybe just to speak back to, we had that presentation from the EU perspective on the value of micro-credentials, but maybe just to, and some of these things will resonate of how we as a university see the value of micro-credentials and the innovation. So we do see that MicroCreds is particularly useful in bringing that sense of definition and standards to not just an institutional level, but also that kind of national level, which is extremely important, because it's not just one university speaking about the benefits of micro-credentials. The collective is where you start seeing the real value of them. And they're really positioned so that you can close that talent gap. From an employer's point of view, it's really really useful in terms of retaining the staff and retaining the talent that you have. As Helen mentioned, we're at close full employment, so it becomes very hard to recruit in new talent. So the employers are really starting to see micro-credentials as a way of retaining talent and making it attractive for people to stay. For the learners, it's a really useful way to engage with education without overcommitting. So again, you're kind of getting over that sense of hesitation in terms of being fearful, I suppose, of engaging with education, recognizing that it is a need, but there can be some hesitation, and micro-credentials do help in breaking down that particular barrier, and not only in terms of commitment, but also as a stepping stone towards those kind of larger awards or qualifications, masters and diplomas. Again, because they're short and sharp, they do fit to meeting immediate competency gaps. This is also balanced with meaning that staff they don't need to be away from work for too long, so there's a shorter staff release. And that the learner really does have that freedom and autonomy to manage their own development pathway. And this all lends to that value, that employer proposition, that the employer can help to support them through the diverse kind of range of micro-credential topics that are involved. And so it is really that sense of a kind of partnership between the employer and the employee in terms of developing their own talent. So just to mention, I suppose, we say that we speak to industry, but we also have formal structures to ensure that the micro-credentials that we are delivering are meeting those labour market needs. I think, again, it was mentioned that sometimes the universities can be a little bit far removed, and that can be a challenge in terms of understanding what labour market needs. But we do really try to incorporate into the design and into the governance of our micro-credentials, having that consultation with various different stakeholders. So not only within our internal advisory group, we have a program oversight groups board, so that we, I suppose, propose ideas and get their approval and get their, so again, so it's that sense of recognition, starting with the, making sure that the micro-credentials that we're delivering are of value. And then we also have then an international advisory group supporting the design of our micro-credentials. And faculty as well. I suppose a lot of our micro-credentials come from a place of passion, that they themselves, through their own networks and their own experience, their own research experience, oftentimes recognise that there's a talent gap. So we encourage those to come forward with their expressions of interest, and then we develop those into the various different micro-credentials. And we do see that it's a very important consultation. It's a very important in terms of communicating with our various different groups to ensure that we maintain that that value and that spotlight on micro-credentials. So we do see the three main areas for discussion are really those with our faculty, in that internal buy-in, our learners, but then also the regional enterprise groups. So that we're moving from we're developing, maturing from a point of awareness, but then towards comprehension and activation. For our faculties, we are moving from a position of early adoption towards, trying to mainstream it across the university. It is a challenge. We're introducing something innovative into a traditional institution. So it's important that we really allow, we're not afraid to introduce to have those conversations, to have because sometimes you do get that pushback, and I suppose that's when we really try to finesse what it is that we are delivering as a micro-credential, and the outcome then is it's a much better product at the end of the day. In terms of engaging with our learners, we do see that they are being received very positively, and that a vast majority of them would consider taking up another micro-credential within a very short time frame after the completion. So it really gives that sense that it is a positive experience, and one that they want to continue and, I suppose, develop those habits for lifelong learning. And then in terms of regional enterprise groups, we again actively engage with groups, facilitating roundtable discussions, just showing here an example of working with our CIPD colleagues. So these HR managers in a number of different companies who came to the University of Limerick for a roundtable discussion. And you can see that we were talking about short learning experiences. But it's a really important event, an opportunity to listen directly from industry, to understand where their needs are. We ask them the question, what are your priorities that you think might be addressed by micro-credential? And you see just from the kind of the word cloud there, the areas that they think are of priority to them. And you might see that they leadership tends to come up a lot of the time, management, but cybersecurity, as Helen was mentioning, data analysis, these are the type of topics that are coming up. And I suppose these are the things then that inform us in the design of our micro-credentials. We extend then also to other, discussing with other industry focus groups. And again, we've facilitated a number of these with our colleagues from SkillNet Ireland through the EAGLE project, a European project that's looking at the digitalization skills for SMEs. And we brought together various companies in the region to discuss and really listen to what their priorities are so that we can address those. So where we are, we currently have an offering over 100 micro-credentials. These are available on our own local university site, and we divide them up into categories such as these, because these are, I suppose, the priority areas, as I said, lining with those kind of transversal, those I suppose, traditional areas of leadership and management, but then also there are a number in terms of, let's say, aviation and health and safety that are very quite regionally specific for Limerick and for the Shannon area. And I suppose it's just giving you a breadth of the topics that we address with our micro-credentials. Just wanted to touch on one other one aspect as well, mentioning about that sense of lifelong learning and maybe working towards those kind of larger qualifications, those awards. This is how we kind of picture it. We see this as a journey. It's not that they have to be continually linear, but that we see that our micro-credentials, they offer the chance to develop your skills, knowledge, competencies, quite short. That's how we would categorize them as. They're kind of typically 6 to 12 weeks, offered part-time. Our learners are professional learners. They're working full-time, so the education is really there to fit around those other life commitments. Where we would see that they would fit into a slightly larger award, our professional diploma, it's still quite small. It's only 30 ECTS, so technically that could be seen as a micro-credential in and of itself, but that would be a full award. And then those professional diplomas, they're, I suppose, they're recognised, but within the University of Limerick, we have what's called a Masters of Professional Practice, where you can combine three professional diplomas to get your Masters, which is an extremely attractive award for anyone who is in working. And the real benefit of these ones is that not all the professional diplomas have to be issued by the University of Limerick. We have a recognition process there to enable other professional diplomas to fit into that Masters of Professional Practice. And just to, I suppose, finish up just mentioning with the other European projects, I suppose this is where we would see that we are taking the lessons that we're learning through the MicroCreds project, through our experience of working with industry, and building that into other European projects, just and learning again from those other contexts of how we can engage with those industry partners, and really, I suppose, build up the value proposition for micro-credentials. So through EAGLE, which is, as I said, focusing on digitalization for SMEs, but then also Reboot, focusing on the manufacturing sector. So again, slightly different areas, but a similar kind of approach of engaging with industry partners, understanding their needs, and then developing education offerings that meet their particular needs. So I'll draw to a conclusion there. I suppose maybe just to kind of the final part there is that gaining skills while working, I suppose, is something that we are really trying to promote. And that's something that I think Timmy was mentioning in the video, is that that companies do see that this is now something that is necessary, that their talent, that their workforce want to develop skills, and that companies are now in a position to help those staff members to develop those skills, and that through working with the likes of ourselves, that we're able to deliver that with micro-credentials. So that's I suppose our experience at the University of Limerick. Welcome your questions and comments, and I'm really sorry that the video didn't work, but I hope we did Timmy proud in trying to represent what he wanted to share. Thanks.
No worries at all, and I can always share the video later if you like. That's totally fine. We have time for 2 quick questions before moving to the next sessions, because we are running a bit out of time. Unless there are any new questions, please raise your hand. I can't see everyone, but that Wait, I can do it through here. But I saw that there was one question by Joao and one question by me, actually. So Joao, go ahead and we'll see whether there's time for mine.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think the most relevant is how do businesses cope with the time employees need to attend micro-credentials? And if these afterwards the upskilling that the employees get is recognized on the progression, on their career progression inside the company. Do you have information on this?
Yeah, Joao, the majority of our micro-credentials are delivered online, so it's really accessible for employees to undertake a particular short program. They also, because companies want to retain talent, they're very open to not only funding them if the funding is needed, but also by giving them some time off to attend maybe an online lecture or do some of their coursework. So they're really, and they see it as a nice way for students to get back, to dip their toe back into the water so that they can potentially go on and do a bigger program. And most of those all of the micro-credentials have a certificate of study once they're completed, and then they can stack them towards a bigger award. So if say they take 2 micro-credentials, they go on to do a professional diploma, they're exempted from those 2 micro-credentials going forward. So it's really attractive to employees and a great retention tool for companies, because once, as you know yourself, while they're studying, you know, they're working with you, and a lot of the work on the micro-credentials would be work-based learning. So it's really attractive for both the company and the student, because they're probably working on some kind of in-company project.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I would actually move to Joao's presentation and answer any remaining questions at the end if we have more time.
Yeah,
if you're fine with that, Joao.
Sorry, I need to share my screen. So I'm sharing my screen. Is this one here? Okay, great. So are you see my presentation, I suppose?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so good morning, everybody, and I'll try to be brief, and so we can finish on time. And so what I'm going to show you today is our insights from our Doctoral for You project, and how we are using digital credentials in doctoral education. So the aim of the Doctoral for You project is to enhance PhD employability by recognizing or highlighting the importance of the transferable skills they acquire as early career researchers in their doctoral training and research activities. So I'm going to make a very quick pass through the different work packages, the main work packages, and then I'll go to some more details on the package on digital credentials, which is what I'd like to share with you today. So we have 7 work packages. The main ones are from work package 1, 2, 3, and 4, which let's say comply with the main objectives of this project. So first of all, just to introduce the consortium, we have 8 partners, 7 universities and the European University Foundation. We have Limerick, we have the Western Norway University of Applied Science, the Arctic University of Norway, the TU Technical University of Yashi, the University Côte d'Azur, which is the consortium leader, and then University of Alcalá and University of Porto. Interestingly, and this has also helped us in some objectives of the project, Porto, Alcalá, and Tromsø, they belong to the same European alliance, which is the OGLO, which obviously help us in some synergies. So the first work package is on skills definition, and the idea behind this package is to have a mechanism to scrutinize and identify the needs on transferable skills for doctoral candidates. So part of it was accomplished by surveys, by looking at asking companies, partner companies, what they need from our candidates. Another part was to search on the EURES European database on job ads for doctoral candidates, and ongoing is a creation of a machine learning model to extract information directly from EURES in way to identify future skills needs. The second work package was on creating, identifying existing courses on transferable skills for doctoral candidates, and also identify new courses that are needed for them, and design them and pilot them. So these two packages are very far ahead in their objectives. The project is scheduled to finish in March 2025, and we have done quite a bit work. I will show some of previews on this one. The third one, which is where Porto is responsible, is on issuing Doctoral for EU credentials. And here we are using two platforms, which is the Open Badges platform that is used for informal training, and European Digital Credentials that for learning platform that Kia and Isabel show at the beginning for issuing digital certificates for accomplished courses. And this is one way to guarantee the formal recognition of these skills acquired during the courses. And finally, one major work package is also the one on career development, and we are the idea is to build talent management centers inside of each university. The partners were not all at the same level. Some of them were much more advanced than others, but we did manage to implement new services in each one of them. Some are making a new talent management center from scratch. Others are improving what they have already in working. And another one is evaluation and communication, of which roundtables are one of our major vectors. Coming to some of the results we already acquired. So in work package 1, we identified transferable skills or transversal skills and competencies in job ads for our PhD holders. Like I said, this was data that was extracted from the EURES database, focused only on those ads that mentioned the let's say the need for a doctoral degree, and this is an interesting learning as well, because not all jobs ads, let's say, they are not, let's say, well formatted for this kind of operation. So this is something we hope that in the future will help. But we got some data, and we are using the ESCO skills data set as base to identify all the skills that show in the ads, and the most relevant ones are on social and communication, on self-management and thinking, and not so much on the core skills and physical and manual skills, some of it on life skills. So these are all, let's say, transversal skills. They are not let's say fixed to a scientific area or a professional area, and they are, let's say, some of the skills we have identified. I'm going to show some of them. So I'm going to show, on the one hand, the top skills from the job ads, collaborating in teams, a network, communicating, proactive approach, leading others, and working efficiently, supporting others are some of the main identified, the ones most frequently identified. We also did a match between the skills that were let's say identified in job ads with the skills that were in demand by employers that we contacted, and there is a relatively strong match between them. Differences occur on dealing with problems, demonstrating willingness to learn, which is something that let's say matches quite well what the previous presentation showed. So business do need people to be constantly updating their skills and willing to evolve in their professional career, not only from, let's say, from the financial point of view, but also from their eagerness to learn new skills. So from these initial surveys, and from already some other information we had from a previous project called Doc Enhance, we propose 3 new courses that will cover most of these skills on effective communication, negotiation, and science diplomacy, on team working and networking, and on personal effectiveness and leadership. These courses are to be, let's say, piloted by 6 of the partners, namely the University of Limerick and Côte d'Azur, which have done the first course. These were done in a winter school in Nice and a summer school in Limerick. This last one occurred last week. Others that already advanced was personal effectiveness and leadership. This was designed by University of Alcalá and pilot as well by University of Porto. And finally, the last one to be pilot is on teamwork and networking, that has been co-designed by University of Alcalá and the University of in the Western Norway, University of Applied Science, and will be also piloted by the Arctic University of Norway. So once these courses are completed, the attendees, the trainees, will be issued a Doc Talent for You credential. So this Doc Talent for You credential is a digital credential based on the European Digital Credentials for Learning infrastructure, and we have been very happy with the support from Kia. In particular, the DG Employment has helped us tremendously, and this will result in 3 deliverables. The first one is a bit more boring, but is a manual for talents for issuing these Doc Talent for You credentials. And here we have done, I'm showing the table of contents of this manual. Here we explain how was the selection process for the platforms we are using, what is a brief summary on policy and legislation, and then how we issued and what kind of limitations and challenges we found. And finally, we hope with an appendix, we hope to systematically document how European digital credential elements are accomplished. And so this work has been done by us. We had a very interesting negotiation with DG Employment, where we basically were very well supported by them on how we can complement information we have. We also identified some of the, let's say, the gaps I understand are missing or exist in the EDCI infrastructure. And I have to be very clear, this was very well received and helped us a lot. And I think we hope to have helped EDCI as well. The second deliverable will be a report on the pilot phases. I show here on the right the front page of our first European digital credential. These will be issued very soon. We took a bit of time since this course number 3 was piloted by 2 universities. We took quite a lot of negotiation between the 2 universities on what will be the content of the digital credential, since we wanted to have, let's say, the most common framework. So we guaranteed that all the information that is on the credential is common to both universities, apart from those things that obviously are not the same, like who is issued the credential. So Porto will issue credentials to our trainees, and Alcalá will issue the credential to their trainees. And we hope to have more to come in 2024. The first batch will probably issue 20 European digital credentials, and this will be published in very soon. Finally, the last deliverable is on guidelines and good practice to be shared with the ERA community. And this has started already in June last year with one webinar on how to issue credentials. This was for internal purposes. The second webinar was more recently in April 2024. And we are doing for deliverable 3.3 2 manuals, apart from everything else that exists in deliverable. One on how to issue digital Doc Talent for You credentials. So we have here a step-by-step tutorial, which is done based on one of our courses on how to issue credentials, what kind of information we have there. And another one that was not foreseen in the project, but we felt that as we were, let's say that we were progressing, that a digital credential, a European digital credential, results on a pair of emails that is sent to the owner of the credential. If the owner of the credential has an Europass CV, it will be directly imported to the Europass. But there is much more than just receiving the emails. There is more on how you upload to a wallet, on how you share it through the EDCI or the European Digital Credentials infrastructure. And so we felt that if we just provided the credential to our trainees without any guidance, this would be not enough. And therefore, we created a new manual for them on how to use the credentials. And we hope this will be fruitful and help them share the news. So the idea of the credential is that they can share it with others. One issue that I think Kia mentioned briefly, but I reinforce, is you can control how the information is provided. So you can put a deadline on a time limit for how the credential will be available to that particular stakeholder you share the information with. And just to finalize so we will be issuing digital credentials on 2024. The ESCO skills are included in the digital credential we're going to issue. And since this was a premise of the call, this is important to refer. We are providing training on how to issue credentials. There will be a third webinar later on the project. And our piloting phase is looking very well, and we have taken several dissemination actions. And I will finish here. I promised to be brief, and I think I did. So Federica, word is to you now.
Thanks a lot. Something to add, as part of the project, we will also organize some online workshops on how to issue the credentials. They will take place in autumn. So if you are interested, just feel free to follow the LinkedIn page. But if you are already following the EUF external newsletter, you will also get some updates about that as well. I'm wondering whether there are any questions on the topic of digital credentials from the audience. And while we wait, I have one question for Joao. So I'm wondering whether your university plans to issue digital credentials beyond Doctoral for you, and if so, in which domain, or whether you're still piloting for the time being and seeing how it goes.
At the moment, we are just piloting, and I know there is some work being done by other colleagues at the rectory, but at the moment the scenario is to gain experience with this piloting and then see what comes next. So it's not something that will guide to a continuous process at the moment.
And I will go with one final question before we close. And my question would be, what are the challenges and opportunities that you've seen so far while piloting the digital credentials?
Okay, some of the challenges we have identified, and I would say relatively to the infrastructure, so the software we are using, this online credential builder from the EDCI, some of the documentation is not up to date, but this is being worked. One challenge, which is interesting, it's a challenge, but it's a very good thing, is that the software is being continuously improved. So I think that's a very good, let's say, indicator how committed the European Commission is on having this software in production mode. But that doesn't mean that the software is not mature. It's mature enough, and in my opinion, it works perfectly well to substitute paper certificates when the time arises. What opportunities I see, and this is where I think we will test next, which is when we start issuing the credentials, we will see how the owners of the credentials react to them, how they share them, how they use them for their portfolio or for their CV. And that's the opportunity I see with this project, is to test and understand how digital credentials can be used to enhance the visibility of one's skills.